Moving on to other news this hour, Iran has reopened its embassy in the Saudi capital of Riyadh, sealing a China-brokered rapprochement deal announced back in March. Iran's diplomatic mission will be run by Alireza Inayati. Iran is also expected to open its consulate in the port city of Jeddah and an office at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Saudi Arabia is yet to confirm when it will reopen its embassy in Tehran or its pick for ambassador. Riyadh severed its relations with Tehran in 2016 after its embassy in the capital and its consulate in Mashhad were attacked during protests over the execution of Shia cleric Sheikh Nemr al-Nemr. Meantime, the new Iranian ambassador has told Iran's Al-Alam TV channel that Tehran seeks closer cooperation with regional nations as it believes security in the region can be protected through economic and cultural cooperation, not by military means. We're going to take a little bit closer look at this event, have the help of two guests out of Tehran. Fuad is the professor, University of Tehran, and political analyst, and out of Washington, D.C., Ali Al-Ahmad, director of Institute for Gulf Affairs. Thank you both for being with me. Well, let's start it off in Tehran. And Fuad, I mean, your overall assessment of this rapprochement.
It's good. Iran and Saudi Arabia are neighbors. They shouldn't be having difficulties. It was the Saudi government that cut relations with Iran, and it's good that they decided to come back and normalize relations. When the announcement was made in Beijing a few months ago about normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I expected to see more concrete steps beside opening of embassies. The hope was that the Saudis will close the Yemen portfolio, the war that unfortunately they started and it needs to finish. That hasn't happened. Also, the Saudi media continues to engage in anti-Iran rhetoric up to today, maybe tomorrow. And that is also something that shouldn't be happening. If two countries are normalizing relations, then the media outlets that are paid by the Saudis should not engage in that level of propaganda against Iran. So there are a few issues that are of concern, but I hope the Saudis manage to go through this process. I know the Americans oppose Iran-Saudi normalization. U.S. Secretary of State is going to Saudi Arabia shortly, and I hope they can resist the pressure from the United States and Israelis and do what's good for their country.
Ali, let's look at the overall situation, because you've covered Saudi Arabia and Saudi crimes. Now with this situation, with this rapprochement by Saudi Arabia and Iran, your overall assessment, I mean, you heard Fuad, Dr. Izzadi talking about there are certain things that already the Saudis haven't gone through with that they were supposed to. In general, do you think that Saudi Arabia can be a reliable, if we want to say, entity with this rapprochement, meaning basically keeping their word about what they said they would or would not do?
Well, you really cannot never trust the Saudi government, but this is also applicable to many governments. The Saudis have murdered, executed 12 Shia Arabs in the past 5 weeks for protesting, and accused them of being sort of, pro-Iran or Iranian agents. And these executions did not prove that there is no relationship. So the Saudis will be the same, but the relationship between the two countries, the two states, is beneficial for the two governments, definitely. And maybe it's beneficial for the region. The Americans, like your guest said, will try to ruin this relationship. And part of it is They are trying to get the Saudis to be allies with the Israelis, and the Americans help the Saudis kill protesters, track dissidents, because as long as Saudi Arabia is more oppressive, it would be easier for the Americans to manipulate them to do or carry their policy, to host their military. So this is a challenge for the Iranians to make sure this relationship go through, but it will not be easy. Saudi Arabia, the Saudi state is like a snake. They have no word, they would not honor anything that they say. So it is a very difficult situation. And the trip of Blinken today, amidst executions of protesters, is going to be a test for this rapprochement.
Okay, well, Dr. Azadi, you talked about some of the challenges. What is it going to take in general? Because, as you said, with the United States and Israel, they are putting pressure on Saudi Arabia. Well, let's look at this first. What do you think made the Saudis change at this point in time? We saw this rapprochement at least taking place, the talks in China back in March. What was the difference this time around? We know that Saudi Arabia has been a close ally of the United States for forever, and we know its relationship with Israel. So, in your perspective, what happened? Was it that they saw it beneficial strategically now with this rapprochement, or how do you assess what has taken place?
The basic answer to that question is that the Saudis, it seems, realized that their efforts of the last 40-some years to change the government in Iran or put pressure on the Iranian government to abandon its foreign policy objectives is not really working out. The policy was failing for many decades. And it's good that the Saudis realized that fact. They spent billions and billions of dollars trying to fight Iran in different parts of the world. And that didn't work out. Iran is a strong country. Iran's people are not going to allow such anti-Iran actions to succeed, and that's what happened. So they realized they need to change. And of course, given the fact that Saudis and Chinese have good economic relations, they assumed that China could be a host for this normalization process. And maybe they thought they can get the Chinese to put pressure on Iran if there are things that the Saudis don't like. Instead of trying to fight Iran directly, maybe use their Chinese connection to engage in those type of activities. That was in March. Obviously, as I said, the Americans, the Israelis like to have countries of this region fighting each other so they can follow their policy of divide and conquer and sell billions of dollars worth of weapons to the Saudis and other things that they do in Saudi Arabia. So there's opposition by the country that the Saudis have historically relied upon since the beginning of the Saudi monarchy. And we have to wait and see whether they can resist that pressure, they can go through that project they started, or they will reverse. We don't know.
Well, Ali, is it possible, in your perspective, that the Saudis have reached a point, as it's said, that MBS wants to concentrate on the country actually expanding technologically and advancing, that's the concern right now, that's the priority, and that basically he wants to do whatever it can to help the country expand. And we know how the U.S. had been using Saudi Arabia, and we saw how Donald Trump talked about Saudi Arabia. Do you think that that has had any effect on this at all, and your assessment on that side of things?
Look,
you know,
the Saudi state was founded with the direct planning and support by the British. Now it has been sustained and supported and propped up really by the Americans for 80 years. And that has not changed. It will not change. And the statement by Anthony Blinken today, official statement, said that this is a relationship that they want to protect. They mean they're protecting the Saudi state, the Saudi regime. And especially now that the Biden administration is an administration that they call Israel first. Their main point is to get the Saudis and the Israelis to have open and public relationships. And this is what they have ignored everything. The oil cuts, all the MBS actions that are seen as his relationship with the Russians, even establishing ties with Iran. The most important part is for him to be in bed with Israel, and that is their only focus. So the American trip to Saudi Arabia will support that only. MBS obviously is doing some economic work, but it has not really benefited the people yet, because the unemployment rate is very high, and the economic situation, inflation is extremely high. But you will not hear about it in the Western press, because the Western press is closely allied with the American foreign policy establishment, and it will only repeat what they say. They sing from the same sheet.
All right. Well, thank you both for being with us. Of course, it's a story that we're keeping our eyes on closer. Thanks so much, Fuad Ezadi, professor, University of Tehran, and political analyst out of Tehran and out of Washington, D.C. Ali Al-Ahmed, director of Institute for Gulf Affairs, IGA. Appreciate you both being with us.